Hey everyone, what's going on? Today's a different kind of video. I'm really excited about this one. We're going to be doing a full music theory analysis of one of the new Sleep Token tracks, Look to Windward. I feel like there's a lot of music theory breakdown content for classical music, pop music, rock music, but no one's really doing it for the metal genre, so I thought I would give it a try. My ultimate goal with this is to give you kind of a deeper appreciation of how the song works, what kind of chords they're using, why it sounds so good or why it sounds the way that it does. And then hopefully if you play music, these videos can kind of give you an idea of how to emulate certain styles or just give you some like compositional tools to use when you're creating your own music. That being said, this video is going to be going into some more complicated music theory ideas. Don't worry, I'm going to try and break things down as simply as possible, but if there are some questions that you all have at the end of this video, be sure to leave those in the comments and I'll explain everything as best as I can. Alright, with all that out of the way, let's just get right into it. The first thing that I want to do is just go over how I'm going to be analyzing this song, and I want to make you familiar with some of the terminology I'm going to be using before we get too deep into things so that you can follow along easier. So in this video, I'm going to be using Roman numeral analysis. This is what's commonly used to analyze classical and popular music. Music is usually built around scales. There are many kinds of scales. Most often we hear major and minor scales. And you can start a scale from any note and call that note scale degree 1. So let's just keep things simple. Let's say we're going to start on the note C. So let's say we want to make a C major scale. So those are the pitches that we would use: C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then the higher C. So in this case, the note C is what we would call scale degree 1 because it is the first note of the scale. We can assign numbers to the rest of the notes in order, starting with C as 1 and counting up. So C would be 1, D would be 2, E would be 3, and so on and so forth. In Roman numeral analysis, we use Roman numerals to describe chords that are built off of those scale degrees. So a Roman numeral 1 would mean a chord built off of scale degree 1, or in this case, C. Uppercase Roman numerals are used to describe chords that are major in quality, or a little more happy sounding, and lowercase Roman numerals are used to represent chords that are more minor in quality. They usually have more of a sad or darker feel to them. I will also be using the terms sharp and flat quite frequently throughout this video. Sharp just means to raise a note by a distance of 1 key on the piano, or by a half step for the more technical term. So, for example, we could have the note C, and then the note C sharp, and it's just one note higher. Sharp means to raise the note a half step. The term flat means the opposite. We're going to lower the note by a half step. So we could have the note, let's just pick D, and then we could have the note D flat, or C sharp. Most of these note names are interchangeable, and you kind of just change whether you're using sharps or flats depending on the context of the piece. In this case, we're going to be referring mostly in sharps because this piece is built around the note C sharp. Alright, so getting into the actual song, it starts out with this really cool synth sound. It's kind of this arcade 8-bit style sort of synthesizer sound. I did my best to recreate that in Serum, and I left the preset in the description down below if anyone wants to use that for free. Before we analyze the chords, like I mentioned, scale degree 1, in this case our main note is C sharp, and it remains that way throughout the whole song. So this is our kind of home note that we're basing everything off of. What's really interesting about the beginning of the song is that it uses a unique scale that's kind of a mixture of a major sound and a minor sound. For the music theory nerds out there, the technical term is a Mixolydian flat 6 scale, but you can think of it more simply as a scale where the first half of the notes in the scale are major sounding and the second half are minor sounding. So that's how this song starts out, and I'm going to play that scale for you. So you can hear how the first 5 notes just sounds like a normal major scale, and it's built around a major chord. If I were to just play those 5 notes, you would think we're in C sharp major. However, the second half of the scale uses some minor notes, and the scale ends on more of a kind of sad, darker sort of tone. So already one thing I kind of want to draw your attention to with this song is that it does this blending of major and minor sounds quite frequently throughout the song, and it really kind of bounces back and forth between major and minor sounding. It's a really unique thing that this song does that I think is really interesting. All right, let's talk about this first chord progression. I'm just going to play it for you first so that you can hear what it sounds like. I'm not going to play any of the rhythms from the song. I'm just going to play the chords as simply as possible so that you can really hear just the chords and just the most simple form of the song as possible. All right, so here's what that looks like written out in Roman numeral analysis. There are a lot of really interesting things about this chord progression. So first of all, a C sharp major chord contains the notes C sharp, E sharp, and G sharp. E sharp and F can also be used interchangeably, so on the screen you're going to see the note F, but F can also be changed out for E sharp. So that's a C sharp major chord. A C sharp minor chord has the notes C sharp, E, and G sharp. So the only difference is that the E is lowered by a half step. So over the first chord, the singer is commonly putting the note E, which you'll notice is a little interesting because the first chord is a C sharp major chord, meaning it should have the notes C sharp, E sharp, and G sharp. The chord does have those notes, but the singer is putting this note on top of it. So altogether that sounds like this. You'll hear that clash in the middle. And that's because those notes are really close together. This kind of further emphasizes that blend of major and minor sounds. That's kind of what I was talking about earlier on in the video. They're using major chords and then throwing in notes that make it sound minor every once in a while. Or sometimes later in the song, you'll see that they use minor chords but then throw in a note that makes it sound more major. And it's this really interesting thing that they're doing throughout this whole song. Alright, so taking a look at the second chord, if you're just looking at the name, it looks a little confusing or complex if you're not familiar with this type of analysis. What it stands for is a B suspended 2 chord, or in Roman numerals, a flat 7 suspended 2 chord. I'm not going to get too much into the details of how this chord works or what those words mean, because it's a little beyond the scope of this video. If you do have questions about it, leave a comment and I'll reply and try and explain it as best as I can. So we start with the notes C sharp and E sharp, or F on the screen. Remember that F and E sharp are actually the same note, but for the purpose of this video, anytime I refer to the note E sharp, just know that I'm meaning the note F on the screen. So that's where we start. One thing that's cool about this chord progression is that the note C sharp is actually in all of the chords. It acts as what we'd call a pedal point, and that just means that it's kind of sustaining throughout the entire chord progression. So we start on C sharp and F. The F goes up a half step, and we add in the note B. And that's that B suspended 2 chord. So we go from here to here. Then all we do is take this B, and we move it down to an A. And that's what that 4-6 chord, or the F sharp minor first inversion chord is. Then all they do from there is take the top note down a half step and the bottom note down a half step. So there's not a lot of movement throughout this chord progression. We're just moving by really small increments. And those middle 2 chords are really just passing us from point A to point B. Point A being here and point B being here. So that's just the first half of this chord progression, and there's already a lot of interesting things going on. But one thing that I want to draw your attention to is that we're not moving very far. We start here, we go here, then we just go down a note, and then both notes down a half step. Everything's only moving by a half step or a whole step at most, and we stay pretty centralized. The second half of this chord progression starts to widen the range of the notes. So then we jump in the bass and we jump in the top voice. So we go from here to here. You'll notice that the distance between the lowest note and the highest note is the widest that it's been. From there, both the top note and the bottom note just follow each other, descending down. So we go from here to here, and then the top note goes down and the bottom note goes down. Same thing happens again. And then the top note jumps up and the bass note jumps up. But throughout all of that, the distance between the lowest note and the highest note stays much wider than it did in the first half of the chord progression. So to me, this chord progression creates the feeling that we're opening up and expanding. We start with these really close together notes and this more dense sound, and then as the chord progression goes, the notes get farther and farther away from each other, and we start to open up and get more of a broad sound. So this chord progression repeats a handful of times while the vocals come in. But it's not until the guitar comes in that we get a real change. And we switch from this kind of blended major and minor scale to a much more minor sounding scale. And in fact, it is the C-sharp harmonic minor scale for our music theory nerds out there. So we go from this scale to this scale. Much more minor sounding. Especially because we use the note E instead of E sharp, as opposed to what we were doing before. That second version has a much more major sounding quality to it. And then, instead of using this note, B, we use the note B sharp, or C natural. And what that does is it makes the last two notes in our scale a half step apart. And that last note really wants to pull up towards the C sharp. If you just stay on that note, your brain should really want to hear, you should want to hear that resolution. So we switch from to. So what this change in scales does is it pulls us into a more darker sounding mood. We go from this, are we major, are we minor, it's kind of a question mark, we're kind of going back and forth between the two types of sounds, to, yep, we're in minor, things are darker, it adds a little more energy, especially with the new instruments, the guitar and the drum set finally coming in, and it just kind of changes the mood. The guitar really draws attention to that relationship in the scale and really cements that we are in a minor key, and I'll show you what I mean. So that little lick right there, that's a very minor sounding lick, and it accents that note. So the guitar riff right there is really, for me, what places us in that more minor sound. So after this heavy section and this more minor sounding riff, we do get a new chord progression that kind of bridges us from this heavy thing back to the more ambient rap kind of section that happens in the middle. And here's what that chord progression looks like. Now, it's nothing too crazy. You'll notice that we go from a 4 chord to a 6 chord to a flat 7 chord, and then we kind of repeat. So it has this sort of rising thing going on, and here's what those chords sound like on their own. So it's an F sharp minor chord, it's got a more sad quality to it, to an A major chord, has a more hopeful and uplifted sound to it, to a B major chord, kind of continuing to pull us up, it sounds more hopeful, and then we drop back down. And what they do is they repeat this chord progression twice without paying it off. To me, this chord progression sounds incomplete. That sounds like it wants to go somewhere else. But what they do is they just repeat it. And then in the guitar, it does this. And what that does is help pull us back towards C sharp, which is our home note and what the rap section is built around. So we have this kind of rising thing. And then finally at the end, it pays off. Here's what that sounds like on guitar. So again, I want to draw your attention to those last four notes. A, G sharp, G sharp. G sharp is scale degree 5 of our C sharp scale. And in music theory, scale degree 5 really likes to resolve to scale degree 1. It's a very natural sounding resolution, and it's very, very common in all kinds of music. So these final four guitar notes help set us up to get back to C sharp, because we go from A to G sharp, and that wants to go back to C. So it's a really natural sounding resolution to get us from our rising chord progression back to our home note of C sharp. So after this section, we get some ambience that transitions us into this more rap and hip hop section. What's interesting about this section is that it stays around the note C sharp, but it avoids giving us the note E or E sharp for a little while. And what that does is it puts us back in that are we major, are we minor sort of question mark zone, where we're not getting the third of the chord that tells us if we're major and minor. We're just getting C sharp and G sharp. That doesn't really tell us if we're major or minor. It's not until you add in that E or that E sharp that tells us if it's a more minor or more major sounding section. So in this part of the song, there's kind of a C drone in the bass. They're just playing around the 4th and 5th scale degree, and that tells us nothing about the quality of the scale. We don't know if we're in major or minor. That is until the background vocals come in on the lyrics, "Give me the edge of a blade." The background vocals do use the note E, placing us in C sharp minor. So whereas the beginning was more of a question mark and that heavy section afterwards is more of a minor sound, this section sort of goes back to making us question if we're in major or minor, and then places us more back in minor. However, there are some ambient guitars in there that sound like this. And you'll notice that first time, and it's only that first time, they use the note E sharp or F. So there is one time in that whole thing where this ambient guitar plays a C sharp major chord. I think that's really interesting because, again, they sort of make us ask that question of are we in major or minor, and then they say, okay, background vocals are in, we're in more of a minor sound. And then immediately we get this guitar that says, actually, maybe we're back in major sound. Again, I really just think that this emphasizes that they're constantly pulling us between those major and minor sounds throughout this whole song, and it's something really unique that the more I analyze, the more I appreciate this song. So the second half of this rap verse, starting on the lyrics, "Even in this garden," at this point we get a new sound. It's like a drone sort of synthesizer thing, and it just hangs out on the note E. The ambient guitar also stops using the note E sharp, so at this point we're just getting C sharp, E, and G sharp, more locking in that minor sound. The chord progression throughout this whole second half is pretty simple, and it's more of just a descending pattern. We go from a C sharp minor chord to a B major chord to an A major chord with an extra seventh added in there just to fill out the chord. And that's it. That's the whole chord progression. It just goes down. So after this rap section, we get this really nice moment. It's probably my favorite part in the whole song, where it just drops to piano and voice, and he's singing in his falsetto, and I think it just sounds really beautiful. Now, I am not a piano player by any means. I can play some chords and some scales and get by, but I did my best to learn the very basic vocal part with the very basic chords. This is not how it's played in the original song. I'm just trying to keep it as simple as possible and show you just kind of the skeleton outline of what's going on with the chords here. So yeah, that section is just super nice. There's some really nice chords in there. I'll leave the Roman numerals and the chord names up on the screen if you want to see those, but I'm not going to go too much into how this chord progression works. It's not really doing anything crazy. It's going from 1 to 6, 5, 6, 1. It's mostly just hanging around the chords 1 and 6, really, and there's a couple of interesting chords in there. The B major chord and the E major 7 chord. But other than that, it's just really hanging out around 1 and 6. The guitar part comes in on kind of this repetitive eighth note chord thing where they're just strumming chords over and over and over again. And they start on the note A, and then they jump up to G sharp. Then they jump down to D sharp, and then down to D. And then when they cut out, we land on a C sharp chord. So what that guitar part does is we start on A, and we're kind of living in A as our main note for a second, and then it does this really nice, that D sharp, D, C sharp, by just moving one half step at a time, it really sets us back up for C sharp to be our main note again. After that whole section, we cut back to the same chord progression from the beginning, everything drops out, and we start building up again. It's the "Will You Halt This Eclipse in Me" lyric section that's just sort of building, and it's the exact same chord progression from the beginning, so there's nothing new to analyze here. After that, the guitars come back in. It's the exact same rhythm as the beginning, and it's the exact same note pattern, everything. It's the same section, and we're just hanging out on C sharp. And it does that over and over again until it pitch shifts down one half step to C natural. And that note is just one half step away. There's nothing that really sets this up. There's no chord progression that they use to bridge us from C sharp being the note to C. It's not really a natural transition. They just do it. They just kind of open up and drop a half step. I think this is really cool. There's no setup to it. I love that it kind of just comes out of nowhere. It makes things heavier. It makes things sound more tense, especially because those notes are just a half step apart. They're really close together, and there's nothing that preempts that change that guides our ears to C being the new note. It just sort of happens, and that's a really cool effect. All right, so that's pretty much going to wrap things up. We've gone through all the sections of this song and broke down all the chord progressions and just pointed out some of the more intricate details of how this song works. So if you did enjoy this, make sure to leave a comment on songs that you'd like to see analyzed in this style. Make sure to like, subscribe, all that good stuff. I was originally going to do the whole album as like a single long form video, but once I got into analyzing just this first song, I realized that was going to take a long time to put together. So I decided I'd rather just do one song at a time and have a faster rollout for this kind of video rather than taking a very long time to make one video and not really know if it's going to be something that you guys enjoy. So let me know if you enjoyed this and if you want to see more videos in this style. Also be sure to check out the covers and tabs I've been making for this album. I'll link the cover and tab for this song somewhere over here. If you'd like to directly support this channel, you can do so by going to the Patreon link in the description. I have all of my tabs that I've done for all the videos on this channel in Guitar Pro and PDF formats, as well as some additional tabs I've done that I've not made videos for, and all of that is available for $2. So if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so in the description. That's going to wrap it up for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what songs you'd like to see done next, and I will see you in the next one.